Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was reborn as a Saiyan in Dragon Ball. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world was screaming, not the people. They had been evacuated hours ago, a testament to the efficiency and trust the world now placed in its heroes. The screaming came from the very bones of the earth, from the tortured sky, from the air itself, which tasted of ozone and pulverized concrete. At the heart of this screaming vortex, in the cratered remains of what was once Kamino Ward, stood Izuku Midoriya. He was no longer a boy. The 24-year-old man who held the title of the One Hero, the symbol of peace, was a far cry from the teary-eyed student who had inherited One for All. His hero costume, the gamma suit that had seen him through so many battles, was shredded to iridescent green tatters. His right arm was a twisted ruin of blackened bone and flesh, a price paid for a blow that had shattered a mountain-sized Noma. His left leg bent at an angle that defied nature. Blood, bright and defiant, painted a grim tapestry across his face, matting his forest green hair into dark, spiky clumps. But his eyes, burning with an emerald fire that had never dimmed, were fixed on his nemesis. All for One was no longer a man either. He was a monument to malevolence, a pulsating mass of stolen quirks that had warped his body into a grotesque parody of humanity. Limbs of stone, wings of shadow, and mouths filled with energy tendrils erupted from his form. He was a living cancer upon the world, and Izuku was the desperate, final course of chemotherapy. Still you stand, Ninth? All for One's voice was a chorus of stolen vocal cords, a discordant symphony of 100 dead men. Your body is spent. Your power is an echo. Look at you, All Might's greatest failure, breaking yourself on the shore of my ambition. Izuku coughed, a wet, rattling sound that brought a fresh spray of crimson to his lips. He could feel it. One for All, the sacred torch passed down through generations, was flickering like a dying candle flame within him. He had pushed it far beyond any limit, far beyond the theoretical 100%. He was running on 150%, then 200%. Channeling the raw, untamed power of the quirk's singularity. The vestiges within him were screaming, not in protest, but in a chorus of unified sacrifice. Do it, kid! The gruff voice of the second user, a phantom memory in his soul. Show him the strength of those who protect. Nana Shimura's voice, warm and fierce, and then All Might's. Go beyond, my boy. Plus. Ultra. Izuku's shattered body crackled with bioelectricity, a storm of green and gold lightning that tore at his own cells. He knew this was it. There was no coming back from this. He could feel his very existence unraveling, his life force being consumed as fuel for this final conflagration. A montage of faces flashed through his mind's eye, a hero's final, precious treasure. Uraraka's determined, floating grace. Ida's rigid, unwavering loyalty. Todoroki's quiet, steadfast friendship, forged in fire and ice. Kaken's explosive grin, a silent acknowledgement of a rivalry that had become a bond stronger than steel. His mother's face, etched with worry but always overflowing with love. All Might, gaunt but proud, giving him that final thumbs up. He had saved them. He would save them all. This was the price. And he would pay it with a smile. You're wrong, Izuku rasped, his voice a broken whisper that carried the weight of a god. He forced his ruined body into a familiar stance, pouring every last drag of power, every memory, every dream, into his core. The golden light of the first user, the black whips of the fifth, the float of the seventh, all of it swirled into a maelstrom of pure energy. A hero's job is to risk his life, to turn his ideals into reality. He took a step, and the ground for a kilometer around him disintegrated into dust. This is the power of 9 generations. The hope of everyone you've ever hurt. His voice rose, no longer a whisper but a roar that parted the storm clouds above. This is my final duty. He lunged, a comet of emerald and gold. He was no longer just Izuku Midoriya. He was One for All incarnate. United States of World Smash. Final legacy. The impact wasn't a sound. It was the absence of it. A perfect, deafening silence as reality itself buckled. Light, pure and absolute, erupted from the point of contact, a miniature sun born of heroic will. It didn't just strike all for one, it unmade him. It burned through every stolen quirk, every corrupted cell, every iota of his malevolent consciousness, erasing him from the very fabric of existence. And in the heart of that cleansing fire, Izuku Midoriya felt his own body turn to ash. The pain was gone. The screaming of the world faded. There was only warmth, a profound sense of peace, and a single, lingering thought. I hope I made you all proud. Then, there was nothing. A gentle, welcoming darkness. An end. Or so he thought. The nothingness did not last. It was replaced, gradually, by something. A sensation. A dull, rhythmic thumping. Thump-thump. Thump-thump. A sound, muffled and aquatic, like being underwater. And warmth. A gentle, cloying heat that surrounded him. Where am I? Consciousness returned not as a rush, but as a trickle of pure confusion. He had no body. No, that wasn't right. He was a body, but it wasn't his. He tried to open his eyes, but the muscles wouldn't obey. He tried to move his arms, the arms that had shattered mountains, but they felt like useless, leaden weights. He tried to call out, to ask for Achiko, for all might, but the only sound that escaped was a gurgling, pathetic whimper. Panic, cold and absolute, seized his mind. This was a quirk. It had to be. Some last-ditch effort by one of All for One's followers. A prison of the mind. He fought against it, trying to access One for All, to feel that familiar, comforting inferno within him. But there was nothing. The sacred fire was gone. He was empty. He was quirkless again. The terror of that thought was so profound, so deeply rooted in the boy he used to be, that it triggered a new, desperate struggle. He thrashed, he pushed, he fought against the warm, dark prison with all his might. The world shifted, compressed, and then he was blinded by a light far harsher than his final attack. Air flooded his lungs for the first time, a burning, shocking sensation. He tried to scream, and this time, a sound emerged, a raw, piercing, infantile wail. His senses were on fire. The light was a physical blow. The sounds were a cacophony of metallic clangs and deep, guttural voices that vibrated through his very bones. The air smelled sterile and strange, tinged with something coppery and wild. He was being held. Large, callous hands were cleaning him with a rough cloth. His mind, the mind of an analytical genius, the one hero, was trapped in this cascade of raw, unfiltered sensation, unable to process it. He could only react. He cried. He cried with the fear of a trapped man, the confusion of a lost soul, and the helpless frustration of an infant. After what felt like an eternity, the chaos subsided. He was placed in a round, transparent pod, bathed in a soft red light and a viscous, green liquid. His frantic breathing slowed. Through the curved glass, he could finally see. The room was metallic, utilitarian, and utterly alien. The technology was bulky and seemingly primitive in some ways, yet far advanced in others. But it was the people who froze the blood in his veins. They were human mostly. But they were all massive, built with a warrior's physique. The men and women alike had wild, spiky black hair and a look of primal intensity in their dark eyes. And most disturbingly, wrapped around their waists like furry, brown belts, were tails. His mind reeled. Where am I? What is this place? He felt a strange, phantom limb sensation. A twitching near the base of his spine. With dawning, stomach-churning horror, he focused his nascent motor skills and managed to look down. There, swishing lazily in the green fluid, was his own brown, furry tail. A wave of nausea and vertigo washed over him. This wasn't a quirk. This wasn't an illusion. This was real. He had died, and this was something else entirely. Reincarnation? A different world? His pod was next to another one. Inside, another baby was crying, its tiny fists clenched. It had the same wild black hair, the same tail. It looked just like him. A twin. Two figures approached their incubators. A woman and a man. The woman had a softer face than the others, her hair long and unkempt. Her eyes, as she looked down at him, held a warmth and a worry that was achingly familiar. It reminded him so much of his mother. The man beside her was the epitome of the harsh world outside. He was tall, powerfully built, his face a road map of old battles, with a prominent X-shaped scar on his left cheek. His expression was a permanent scowl of stern assessment. His gaze swept over the other baby with a flicker of pride, then landed on him. The pride vanished, replaced by a flat, unimpressed neutrality. "Kakarot is strong," the man, his father, grunted. His voice was like grinding stones. "A battle power of 5. Acceptable for a low class." He then pointed a strange, single-lens device on his eye at Izuku's pod. It beeped pathetically. "This one." "Coriander," the man, Bardock, sneered the name with distaste. "His reading is only a 3. Defective." The woman, his mother, Jine, placed a hand on his arm. "Don't say that, Bardock. He's just gentle, Coriander." The name felt alien on his soul. He was Izuku Midoriya. But Izuku Midoriya was a pile of heroic ash in another world. Here, he was Coriander. And he was, once again, a disappointment. A defect. He looked at the other baby, Kakarot, his brother. He felt a strange, primal connection to him, but it was overshadowed by the crushing weight of his new reality. He had been reborn. Reborn as an alien with a tail, into a culture that judged a newborn's worth by its battle power. He had gone from being the symbol of peace to being a defective baby in the span of a single breath. The irony was so cruel, so impossibly bitter, that all he could do was close his eyes and let the infant body's exhaustion take over, his silent, adult screams lost in the placid green liquid of his new womb. The years that followed were a special kind of hell for a mind like Izuku's. The Saiyan creche was not a nursery. It was a gladiatorial pit for toddlers. Children were thrown together in large, sterile chambers, encouraged to fight for everything, for food pellets that dropped from chutes, for the best sleeping spots, for dominance. Izuku, or Kori as he was now called, was horrified. His very soul, forged in the fires of heroism and self-sacrifice, recoiled from this casual brutality. When a larger, bull-headed Saiyan child named Brock punched a smaller boy and stole his food, Kori didn't fight back for himself. He instinctively stood between Brock and the crying child. "Stop it!" he managed, his toddler's voice a high-pitched squeak. "That's not right. You can't just hurt people." Brock just stared at him, confused, before punching Kori in the face. The blows sent him tumbling. Pain flared, sharp and surprising. But what shocked the other children, and the impassive adult overseers, was Kori's reaction. He didn't get up in rage. He didn't power up. He sat up, tears welling in his eyes, but not for himself. He looked at the other boy who was still crying. "Are you okay?" he asked. This act of empathy was so alien, so bizarre in Saiyan society, that it branded him instantly. He was the weird one. The weakling who cried when others got hurt. The freak who tried to share his food. He became an outcast. The other children either ignored him, or used him as a punching bag, baffled and angered by his refusal to fight back with true Saiyan fury. He felt like Deku all over again. Useless. Powerless. Out of place. The overseers would regularly check their power levels. Kakarot, his twin, was boisterous and energetic, his power level climbing steadily. The other children, fueled by constant conflict, saw their numbers rise as well. Kori's remained stagnant. A 3. Sometimes, when he was particularly emotional, it might flicker to a 4, but that was it. He knew why. That aggressive, burning instinct that all Saiyans possessed. He could feel it, a coiled serpent of rage deep within him. But his own spirit, the soul of Izuku Midoriya, actively suppressed it. He refused to let that rage define him. He consciously held back the instincts that his new body screamed at him to unleash. As a result, his power, the energy they called ki, remained dormant, a placid pond when it should have been a raging sea. His father, Bardock, would visit occasionally. He was a low-class warrior, but respected for his prowess on the battlefield. Each visit was the same. He would watch Kakarot wrestle another child into submission with a grunt of approval. Then his eyes would fall on Kori, who was often sitting in a corner, trying to figure out the mechanics of the food dispenser or analyzing the fighting styles of the other children with a familiar, muttering intensity. "Still a failure," Bardock would say to Jine, who always accompanied him. "No fire. No pride. He has the spirit of a tuffle. He won't survive. Jine would always defend him. He's just different, Bardock. He's kind. She would approach Corey, offering him a piece of dried meat she'd saved, her touch the only genuine warmth in his young life. He would look up at her, his dark eyes filled with a weary intelligence that no child should possess, and give her a small, sad smile. He loved this woman, his new mother, but he knew her kindness was as much a liability here as his own. He felt a profound loneliness. He missed his friends with an ache that was a physical pain. He missed the camaraderie, the shared purpose. Here, there was only the cold calculus of strength. He was an artist trapped in a land of colorblind warriors, a philosopher in a world of screaming barbarians. He trained, of course, in secret. He couldn't access One for All, but he could feel the key in his body. He wouldn't use it to dominate or destroy. Instead, he practiced control. He remembered his training with Gran Torino, the feeling of coursing power through his entire body. He tried to do the same with Ki, spreading that tiny power level of 3 evenly, feeling it tingle in his fingertips and toes. It was a pathetic imitation of full cowling, but it was his. It was a piece of Izuka Midoriya he refused to let go of. He was perhaps 4 years old by Saiyan standards when everything changed. Bardock returned from a mission on planet Kanasa, but he was different. He was agitated, haunted. Corey, with his hero's intuition, could sense the man's turmoil. His father would clutch his head at random moments, his eyes going wide with a terror Corey had never seen on his stoic face. One evening Bardock burst into their dwelling, his armor cracked and stained. "Jine! We're running out of time," he was rambling, talking about visions. About their leader, Frisia. About a cold, malicious laugh and the end of everything. He spoke of the planet shattering, of their entire race being wiped out in a single, blinding flash of light. Jine tried to calm him, but the panic in his voice was infectious. Corey stood in the doorway of his room, watching. He knew this feeling. He had felt it before the final battle with All for One. It was the calm before the apocalypse. Bardock's wild eyes suddenly landed on him, and then shifted to Kakarot, who was chewing on the leg of a small, roasted creature. A desperate resolve hardened his father's face. It wasn't love as Corey had known it. It was something more primal, more fierce. It was the desperate instinct to ensure his bloodline survived. "The pods," Bardock commanded. "Get them to the pods. Both of them." Jine was horrified. "But Bardock! They're too young. Corey can't even fight properly." "It doesn't matter," he roared, scooping a bewildered Kakarot into his arms. "Their only chance is off-world. Kakarot is programmed for a remote planet called Earth. It's weak, he should be able to dominate it. Send the other one. Coriander, anywhere. Just get him out of here." The word stung, another casual dismissal of his worth, but there was no time for hurt. The sky outside had begun to glow an ominous, sickly orange. Alarms, loud and frantic, began to blare across the Saiyan capital. It was chaos. Bardock shoved Corey towards his mother. "Go! Now!" Jine swept him into her arms, her face wet with tears. She ran, her powerful legs carrying them through the panicked streets towards the launch bay. Corey clung to her, his analytical mind trying to process the screaming, the explosions, the raw terror. This was so much worse than the evacuations back home. There was no order, no heroes orchestrating a rescue. There was only selfish, brutal panic. They reached the bay. Bardock was already there, strapping a squirming Kakarot into a round, white vessel. He saw them and gestured to an adjacent pod. Jine placed Corey inside, her hands trembling. The interior was cramped, cold, and smelled of antiseptic. She placed a hand on the glass, her voice choked with sobs. "Corey, live. Please, just live. Be strong, my gentle boy." It was the last time he would ever see her. The canopy hissed shut, sealing him in. Through the viewport, he saw his father finish with Kakarot's pod. Bardock placed a hand on his brother's vessel. "Listen, son. You survived this. Avenge us, if you can, and Coriander." He glanced at Corey's pod, and for a single, fleeting moment, the scorn in his eyes was replaced by something else. A flicker of regret? You too, boy. Prove me wrong. The launch sequence initiated. With a gut-wrenching lurch, the pod shot into the sky. Corey was pinned to his seat, watching through the viewport as planet Vegeta shrank below him. He saw his brother's pod launch a moment later, veering off in a different direction. He saw something else, too, a lone figure, floating defiantly in the upper atmosphere. His father. Bardock, surrounded by a swirling aura of blue ki, facing a titanic, spherical starship that blotted out the stars. A single, small figure emerged from the ship, a pale, horned creature in a hover chair. Frieza. Corey couldn't hear the words, but he could see the intent. He watched his father form a ball of energy, a final, desperate act of rebellion. He watched Frieza lift a single, lazy finger. He watched a ball of sunfire grow, a monstrous star of pure malice, dwarfing Bardock, dwarfing everything. The last thing Izuku Midoriya saw of his second home, his birthplace as the Saiyan Corey, was its utter annihilation. The planet, his people, his parents, all consumed in a silent, horrifying flash of genocidal power. The pod's automated systems jumped to light speed, and the stars streaked into lines of white. Corey floated in the dark, the echoes of that cataclysm burned into his mind. He was 4 years old. He was alone. He was a survivor of a massacre. The soul of a hero, a soul that had only ever known the fight to protect, was now filled with a new, cold, and terrifying resolve. He did not know where he was going. He did not know what he would find, but he knew one thing with the certainty of a physical law. The creature named Frieza, the monster who had murdered his world, would one day have to answer to the son of Bardock. He would have to answer to the soul of Izuku Midoriya. He had a new purpose. It was no longer about becoming a symbol. It was about ensuring that no one, ever again, would have to watch their world die. The universe was a silent, screaming void. Inside the cramped sphere of his escape pod, Corey was a prisoner of the view screen. The fiery death of planet Vegeta did not fade with distance. It was seared onto the back of his eyelids, a permanent afterimage of cosmic violence. The automated systems had already wrenched the pod into faster-than-light travel, twisting the stars into hypnotic, elongated streaks of white and blue, but the image of his father's final, defiant stand against that monstrous son of an attack remained. Bardock. A man he had barely known, a father who had called him a defect. Yet, in that final moment, he had been a hero. A doomed, tragic hero fighting a god for the sake of his people. And Jine, his mother, her face a mask of love and terror, her final words a plea for him to live. He was 4 years old. He had lost 2 mothers, 2 fathers, 2 worlds. The grief was a physical weight, a crushing pressure in the chest of his small, powerful body. The soul of Izuku Midoriya, a man who had died at 24, wept with the helplessness of a child. He curled into a tight ball, his tail wrapping around his legs, and for an immeasurable amount of time, he floated through the silent abyss, a lonely ghost in a metal coffin. His pod was a marvel of Saiyan engineering, built for survival above all else. A nutrient-rich fluid was periodically pumped into the cabin, which he absorbed through his skin, keeping his body sustained. A hypnotic light pattern on the ceiling induced long periods of stasis, forcing his young body to sleep and grow, preserving his energy. During his waking hours, there was nothing but the star-streaked void and the hum of the life support. It was in this profound isolation that Corey truly began to process his new existence. He was a Saiyan. A member of a warrior race, now all but extinct. He had a tail, an organ that, he slowly discovered, was strangely sensitive and provided an odd sense of balance. He had an innate connection to the energy his father had wielded, the key that now lay dormant within him like a sleeping beast. He thought of his brother, Kakarot, in his own pod, rocketing towards a different destiny. Sent to a planet called Earth to dominate it. The word left a sour taste in his mouth. Would Kakarot grow up to be like the other Saiyans? A brutal, unthinking warrior? The thought saddened him. That tiny, crying baby in the incubator next to him, what would he become without a mother's kindness or a hero's example to guide him? He spent his waking hours not in rage or despair, but in analysis. It was his oldest coping mechanism. He studied the pod's simple interface, learning the Saiyan script from the system readouts. He committed the star charts to memory. And he turned his analytical gaze inward. He meditated, just as he had seen some of the older heroes do back in Japan. He tried to find the source of his ki. He remembered the feeling of one for all, that raging inferno of stockpiled power. Ki felt different. It wasn't a gift passed down, it was a wellspring, an ocean that was intrinsically his. But it was a wild, untamed ocean. When he got angry or frustrated, he could feel it surge, a hot, prickly sensation under his skin. It begged to be unleashed in a furious, explosive burst. But that was not the way of Deku. Control, efficiency, precision. Those were the hallmarks of his fighting style. He refused to become a berserker. So, he fought against his own instincts. He focused on his breathing, on feeling the ki not as a weapon, but as a part of his life force. He pushed it gently, from his core down his arms to his fingertips, then down his legs to his toes, and even through his tail. He tried to make it flow like blood in his veins, a constant, steady current. It was exhausting, painstaking work, like trying to teach a river to flow uphill. But he had nothing but time. After what felt like an eternity, the ship's chronometer indicated nearly a year had passed. A blaring alarm jolted him from his meditative state. Red lights flashed across the cabin, the view screen shimmered, and the streaks of light resolved back into individual stars. A planet loomed before him, a swirl of gentle greens, soft blues, and shimmering silver clouds. It looked peaceful. The pod shuddered violently as it entered the atmosphere. It was a controlled crash, designed to land the occupant with minimal damage to the vessel. He was thrown against his restraints as the pod screamed through the sky, a tiny meteor bringing a lost sun to a new world. With a final, ground-shaking impact that rattled his teeth, everything went still. For a long moment, there was only the sound of his own frantic breathing and the ticking of the cooling metal. Then, with a pneumatic hiss, the hatch blew open, flooding the cramped interior with the most wonderful sensations he had ever experienced. The air was sweet, carrying the scent of damp earth, blooming flowers with a fragrance like honey and lavender, and the clean smell of recent rain. A gentle breeze rustled unseen leaves. Two suns, one a brilliant gold and the other a soft, rosy pink, hung in a sky the color of a robin's egg. He was in a clearing, surrounded by a forest of trees with silvery bark and leaves that shimmered with every color of the rainbow. He unstrapped himself and stumbled out of the pod, his legs wobbly from long disuse. His bare feet sank into soft, mossy ground. He took a deep, shuddering breath, filling his lungs with the air of this new world. After the sterile metal of the pod and the brutalist architecture of planet Vegeta, this place felt like a paradise. A sound made him freeze. It was a soft, chiming melody. He looked toward the edge of the forest, and saw them. They were tall and impossibly slender, with skin the color of polished alabaster. Their hair was stark white, braided with glowing flowers. Their faces were serene, dominated by large, luminous eyes that held no malice, only a deep, unnerving curiosity. They wore simple, hand-woven robes of blue and green. They were the source of the chiming. Small, crystalline bells hung from their wrists, ringing softly with every graceful movement. These were the people of Thera. They did not approach with weapons. They did not shout in alarm. They simply watched him, their heads tilted. Corey felt a strange sensation wash over him, a gentle psychic wave of calm and inquiry. It wasn't an invasion of his mind, but a soothing presence, a wordless question. Who are you? Are you hurt? Corey, the boy with the soul of a hero who always put others first, did something he hadn't done in a year. He relaxed. His battle-ready posture softened. He looked at these gentle, quiet people, and his Saiyan instincts, which screamed threat assessment, combat potential, dominance, were silenced by the overwhelming whisper of Izuku Midoriya's soul, which simply said, "They are civilians. They are safe." An elderly pair stepped forward from the small crowd. A male and a female, their faces etched with the fine, kind lines of age. The male, Kale, had eyes like warm twilight. The female, Elara, had a smile that reminded him so fiercely of his first mother that his heart ached. Elara knelt down, moving with a slow, deliberate grace so as not to startle him. She did not speak, but he felt her psychic presence, a projection of pure, undiluted compassion. It was a feeling of warm blankets and comforting soup, of a hand gently stroking his hair. "You are lost, little star child," she finally said, her voice as soft as the chiming bells. "You are alone." Tears, hot and unexpected, welled in Corey's eyes. For the first time since his rebirth, he was being looked at not as a power level, not as a warrior or a defect, but simply as a lost child. The dam of grief and loneliness he had so carefully constructed within his mind finally broke. A choked sob escaped his lips, and then another. He crumpled to the ground, the small, powerful body of a Saiyan child finally succumbing to the overwhelming sorrow, and he wept. Alara did not flinch. She simply moved closer and gathered him into a gentle embrace. Her arms were frail, but her hug was the safest place in the universe. In that moment, Corey knew he had found his new home. Planet Thera was a world built on empathy. The Therans were not fighters. Their psychic abilities had allowed them to evolve beyond conflict. They could feel the collective mood of their communities, sensing discord before it could fester. Their society was agrarian, communal, and deeply connected to the natural rhythms of their world. For Corey, it was a haven. Alara and Kale adopted him without hesitation, raising him as their own. They were fascinated and endlessly patient with his peculiarities. His prodigious appetite, which could clean out their pantry in a single sitting, was a source of constant, good-natured amusement. His tail was treated as a curiosity, something Alara would sometimes gently braid with flowers, much to his initial embarrassment. Most importantly, his nature, the core of his Ukamitariya, was celebrated. When he rushed to help a neighbor whose roof had been damaged in a windstorm, lifting beams that should have been impossible for a child his age, he was praised for his helpfulness. When he spent hours finding a lost young feline, a six-legged creature that the Therans kept as companions, he was lauded for his kindness. His analytical mutterings about crop rotation and atmospheric patterns were listened to with genuine interest by Kale. Here, his empathy was not a weakness. His desire to protect was not a defect. It was a virtue. For the first time in this new life, he felt like he belonged. But the soul of a hero cannot rest, and the power of a Scion cannot be ignored. He loved his peaceful life, but the memory of Frisia and the destruction of two worlds was a constant, cold stone in his gut. He knew that peace was a fragile thing. A hero's duty wasn't just to enjoy peace, but to guarantee it. So he trained. Every morning before the twin suns rose, he would venture deep into the shimmering forests or high into the windy plateaus. He continued his painstaking work with key control. He remembered the lessons of One for All, how its immense power would have destroyed his body if he hadn't learned to channel it, to spread the load across every inch of his being. He decided to apply that same principle to his Scion power. Other Scions, from what he remembered, used ki like a club. They would gather it, let it explode outwards in a fiery aura, and use it for raw, overwhelming force. It was inefficient. It was wasteful. It was the technique of a brute. Corey sought to use ki like a scalpel. He sat cross-legged on a mountain peak, the wind whipping his wild black hair around his face. He closed his eyes and reached inward. He found that ocean of power within him, and instead of letting it rage, he began to build channels. He visualized his circulatory system, every vein and artery, and imagined his ki flowing alongside his blood. He focused on maintaining a constant, steady output, pushing a consistent 1% of his total power to every single cell in his body. It was maddeningly difficult. His Scion instincts fought him every step of the way, screaming at him to let go, to let it all erupt. But the discipline of Izuka Midoriya, the boy who had meticulously mastered a power that was trying to tear him apart, was stronger. Slowly, painstakingly, he achieved it. A low hum began to emanate from his body. There was no visible aura, no crackle of lightning. But he felt it. A sustained, full-body reinforcement. His senses sharpened. His speed and strength increased tenfold, but in a smooth, controlled way. He could move like a blur without leaving a trail of destructive energy in his wake. He stood up and looked at his hand. He channeled a bit more power, maybe 5%. A faint, silvery sheen flickered over his skin, almost invisible in the rosy light of the smaller sun. Full Cowling. He whispered, the name a ghost from another life. He shook his head. No. This was something new. A fusion of two lives. I'll call it ki channeling. He spent years perfecting it. He would practice his movements, blending the brawling style he'd observed in other Saiyans with the precise, tactical martial arts he remembered from his hero training. He developed a fighting style that was a unique hybrid, the overwhelming power of a Saiyan, tempered and guided by the analytical mind of a hero. He learned to focus his channeled ki into specific points for bursts of power, a Delaware smash-style punch, a St. Louis smash-style kick, all without the telltale energy flare of a traditional ki blast. He grew from a small boy into a lean, powerful teenager. His love for his new home and his adoptive parents was absolute. But he always watched the stars, the hero in him ever vigilant, praying his peace would last. Prayers, he knew from long experience, were seldom answered. He was 16 years old, helping Kale harvest the glowing moonmelons from their fields, when the sky was torn open by a sight he had prayed he would never see again. A ship, crude and ugly, descended from the heavens. It was nothing like his sleek, functional pod. This was a jagged monstrosity of rust-colored metal and jagged spikes, a flying scar that bled oily smoke into the pristine air and atmosphere. The sigil painted on its hull, a stylized, horned visage, was unfamiliar, but the feeling it gave him was not. It was the feeling of bullies and conquerors, the scent of the Frisia force. It landed with a careless, ground-shattering thud a few kilometers from their village, crushing a swath of iridescent forest. A ramp slammed down, and a dozen figures emerged. They were a motley collection of brutish alien species, armed with blasters and clad in cheap, cracked armor. They laughed, their voices grating and cruel, as they began firing their weapons wantonly, blasting the ancient, silver-barked trees into splinters. Fear, cold and sharp, gripped the village. The Therans were not cowards, but they were utterly non-violent. The concept of such casual destruction was alien to them. Their psychic network became a cacophony of terror and confusion. Elara and Kale rushed Cory into their small stone house. "Stay here, Cory," Kale said, his voice trembling as he grabbed an old, gnarled farming tool to bar the door. "We must not show aggression." Cory looked at his father's terrified face, at the tears welling in his mother's eyes. He felt the collective panic of the village, and in that moment, the years of peaceful farming fell away, and the one hero, Izuka Midoriya, stood in his place. "No," he said, his voice quiet but imbued with an authority that made both his parents stop and stare. "Hiding won't save us. Appeasement won't stop them. I've seen this before. Bullies like this, they only understand one thing." He walked to a worn wooden chest in the corner of his room. He had prepared for this day, hoping it would never come. He pulled out a simple, dark green tunic and trousers, woven from tough Theran fibers. Then, he lifted out a mask. It was carved from the silvery bark of a fallen tree, sanded smooth and stained a dark green. It was a simple design, covering the upper half of his face, with large, expressive eye holes and a shape that vaguely mimicked the ears of All Might's classic hairstyle. It was a tribute. A promise. He put it on. "Cory, what are you doing?" Elara whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. He turned to face them. The boy they had raised was gone. In his place stood a guardian. The gentle ki he normally kept hidden now shimmered around him, a barely perceptible haze of power. His dark eyes, visible through the mask, burned with a familiar, heroic fire. "For years you've accepted me for who I am," he said, his voice steady and calm. "You gave a lost boy a home. You taught me the value of peace. Now, let me show you what I was born to do." He walked to the door and gently moved Kale's arm aside. "Stay inside. Keep everyone safe. I'll handle this." He stepped out into the rosy sunlight of the twin suns. He could hear the pirates' raucous laughter getting closer. They were approaching the village square. He took a deep breath, and the ocean of power within him began to churn. He didn't let it explode. He channeled it. 10%. 20%. The silvery sheen of his ki channeling now coated his skin, a subtle armor of light. The ground beneath his feet cracked slightly from the pressure. The leader of the pirates, a hulking, four-armed brute with reptilian skin, swaggered into the village square. "All right, you pale-faced weaklings," he bellowed. "Hand over all your valuables, and maybe we'll only burn down half your village." His cronies cackled. Then they saw him, a lone figure, standing in the center of the square. A teenager in a simple green outfit and a strange, wooden mask. The pirate leader sneered. Well, look what we have here. A little twig playing dress-up. You think you can stop us, boy? Corey didn't answer. He just stood his ground, his body a coiled spring of Saiyan might, his mind a razor-sharp blade of heroic strategy. The soul of Izuku Midoriya looked out through the eyes of a Saiyan warrior, and for the first time in this new life, he wasn't just Corey, the farmer's son. He was a hero, standing between the innocent and the wicked. This planet is under my protection, he said, his voice ringing with a power that made the air itself vibrate. Leave now, or you will be removed. The silence that followed Corey's declaration was thick and heavy, broken only by the gentle chiming of the wrist bells on the Therans hiding in their homes. The dozen space pirates stood frozen for a moment, processing the sheer audacity of the masked teenager standing before them. Then, the tension shattered into a wave of derisive, ugly laughter. The leader, a hulking, four-armed reptilian named Grak, slapped one of his lower knees. Ha! Protection? You hear that, boys? The little twig is protecting this mud ball. His crew, a motley assortment of battle-scarred aliens, joined in the cackling. One of them, a squat, tusked creature, spat a glob of purple slime onto the manicured moss of the village square. I've seen scarier-looking appetizers, the tusked pirate grunted, leveling his blaster. Let's just fry him and get on with the pillaging, boss. Grak held up a meaty, three-fingered hand. Now, Craig. Where's your sense of fun? Let's humor him. He cracked his 4 sets of knuckles, the sound like rocks grinding together. All right, kid, you want to be a hero? Show us what you've got. You get 1 free shot. Corey's mind was a whirlwind of calculations, a state he hadn't fully entered since his final battle against All for One. He analyzed their stances, their weaponry, their casual overconfidence. 12 opponents, all armed. The leader was clearly the strongest, his power level, a concept Corey could now sense with his refined key control, was a messy, chaotic spike compared to the others. He needed to end this quickly, decisively, and with as little collateral damage as possible. And if he could manage it, non-lethally. That last part was the core of his being. A hero saves people. He doesn't kill. Even these thugs? They were criminals, not existential threats. He would incapacitate them, disarm them, and send them on their way. A classic hero's resolution. I'm giving you one last chance, Corey said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline singing in his veins. Leave. There doesn't have to be a fight. Too late for that, Grak grinned, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. Attack. The pirates didn't need a second order. A volley of crimson and yellow energy bolts screamed through the air, converging on Corey's position. The coordinated attack was meant to vaporize him instantly. To the terrified Therans peeking through their windows, it was a horrifying spectacle. To Corey, it was a problem to be solved in slow motion. He activated key channeling, pushing it to 30%. The world didn't slow down, but his perception and processing speed accelerated exponentially. The dozen blasts, each moving faster than sound, seemed to crawl toward him. He saw their trajectories, their energy fluctuations, the slight waver in Craig's aim. He didn't dodge. He moved. In a flicker of motion too fast for any of the pirates to track, he was gone. The energy blast slammed into the spot where he had been standing, erupting in a deafening explosion that tore a smoking crater in the village square. Got him! Craig cheered prematurely. A voice spoke directly behind him. No, you didn't. Craig whirled around, his piggish eyes wide with shock. Corey was standing there, not a scratch on him. Before the pirate could even think to raise his blaster, Corey chopped him precisely on the back of the neck with the edge of his hand. It was a perfectly executed strike, channeling just enough ki to overload the alien's nervous system without causing permanent damage. Craig's eyes rolled back into his head, and he crumpled to the ground unconscious. 1 down. 11 to go. The other pirates stared in disbelief. He had moved faster than they could see. What the? Where'd he come from? Corey didn't give them time to regroup. He became a green and silver blur, a phantom of righteous fury. He flowed through their ranks like water. A pirate swung a vibro axe, Corey ducked under it, tapped the alien's elbow with 2 fingers, sending a jolt of ki that made him drop the weapon, then followed up with a sweeping kick to the temple. Unconscious, a pair of insect aliens fired their blasters from opposite sides. Corey leaped, planting his feet on their heads and using them as springboards to launch himself high into the air, before coming down and disabling them both with simultaneous palm strikes to their chests. Knocked out cold, he was a symphony of precision. Each movement was calculated, each strike designed for maximum efficiency and minimum harm. This wasn't the explosive, earth-shattering power of a typical Saiyan. This was the refined, tactical brilliance of Deku, amplified by a body capable of keeping up with his mind. He wasn't a sledgehammer. He was a surgeon's laser. In less than 10 seconds, 10 of the pirates were laid out in neat, unconscious piles around the square. Only Grak and one other, a slender, 4-eyed alien who had been hanging back, remained. Grak's jaw was hanging open, his earlier confidence completely evaporated and replaced by a primal fear. He had fought bounty hunters, corporate enforcers, even low-level members of the Frisia force. He had never seen anything like this. This wasn't a fight. It was a ghost dismantling his entire crew without breaking a sweat. What are you? Grak stammered, taking a clumsy step back. Corey stood in the center of the carnage, his posture unchanged. The subtle, silvery aura of his ki channeling was the only sign of the immense power he was wielding. I am the guardian of this world. Your business here is finished. Fear warred with greed in Grak's eyes. He glanced at his downed crew, then at the simple, undefended village. He was a cornered animal, and cornered animals are at their most dangerous. His eyes darted around, searching for any advantage, any leverage, and then he saw it. Peeking from the doorway of the nearest house was the terrified face of an older woman. Elara. His mother. Elara, get back inside. Corey yelled, his calm finally breaking, but it was too late. With a speed that belied his bulk, Grak lunged. Not at Corey, but at the house. He smashed through the stone doorway, the sound of splintering wood and Elara's scream tearing through the air. Corey's blood ran cold. He shot forward, a streak of green light, but Grak was already emerging, one of his massive arms wrapped around Elara's frail body. He held her in front of him like a shield, the sharp claws of his other hand hovering menacingly over her throat. Nobody moves! Grak roared, his voice trembling with a mix of terror and triumph. One twitch, hero, and I snap her skinny neck. I mean it! The world stopped. Corey froze mid-stride, his fists clenched so hard his knuckles were white. The cool, calculating hero vanished, replaced by a panicked son. He saw his mother's wide, terrified eyes. He felt her fear as a sharp, psychic sting in his own mind. Let her go, Corey said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. The subtle silver aura around him began to flicker, a hint of a much wilder, hotter energy trying to break free. Not a chance. Grak spat, starting to back away towards the forest, dragging Elara with him. You're going to stand right there and let us leave. We'll take the old lady with us as insurance. Once we're in orbit, we'll send her back in an escape pod. Maybe. Corey knew he was lying. He saw the cold, murderous intent in the pirate's eyes. Elara was a disposable shield, nothing more. His mind raced, cycling through 1,000 scenarios. He could rush him, but Grak's claws were too close to her throat. Any move he made, any sudden burst of speed, could startle the pirate into a fatal spasm. This was the Kobayashi Maru. A no-win scenario. In his old life, there would have been another hero, a backup plan, a clever gadget. Here, there was only him, a monster, and the person he loved most in this world. He remembered a lesson from Aizawa-sensei, from a lifetime ago. Sometimes, the most heroic choice is the one that is the least ideal. Hesitation in the face of true evil costs lives. Please, let her go, he pleaded, trying one last time, the desperation raw in his voice. Take whatever you want. Just don't hurt her. Grak just laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. I'm calling the shots now, hero boy. He tightened his grip, and Elara let out a small, pained whimper, and something inside Corey snapped. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was a primal, instinctual response, born from the fusion of two souls. The Scion's savage, protective fury merged with the hero's absolute, uncompromising will to save. The dam he had built around his ki, the careful channels he had cultivated for years, shattered. The wild ocean of his power, the true, untamed might of a son of Bardock, erupted. His ki, no longer a subtle silver sheen, exploded outwards in a visible, violent torrent of emerald green light. The ground cracked beneath him. The air pressure dropped so suddenly that it created a sonic boom, and a swirling vortex of wind and dust kicked up around him. His hair, normally a dark green tinged black, whipped upwards, flashing with a pale golden light at the tips. His eyes, once a gentle, dark brown, now glowed with a furious, emerald luminescence. Grak stumbled back, his eyes wide with utter terror. He was no longer looking at a teenager. He was looking at a god of wrath. The power rolling off Corey was suffocating, a physical weight that made his bones ache and his courage turn to water. Corey didn't move from his spot. He simply raised his right hand, palm open, and pointed it at Grak. Time seemed to stretch, every second an eternity. I said, he whispered, and his voice was no longer his own, but a layered chorus of rage and sorrow that echoed across the square. Let her go. He didn't fire a flashy beam. He didn't form an energy ball. He simply willed it. A needle-thin, hyper-compressed beam of pure ki, no wider than a pencil, shot from his fingertip. It moved faster than light, faster than thought. It was the physical manifestation of his singular, desperate intent: save her. The beam did not strike Grak. It struck the pirate's wrist, the one with the claws hovering over Alara's throat. There was no explosion. No sound. Grak's arm, from the wrist down, simply ceased to exist. It was cauterized and atomized in the same microsecond. The pirate stared stupidly at the smoking, perfectly sealed stump where his hand had been, his brain unable to process the speed and precision of the attack. His grip on Alara faltered. In that same instant Corey moved. He crossed the 50-meter distance between them in a time frame so small it couldn't be measured. He appeared at Alara's side, his arm wrapping protectively around her waist, and in the next instant, they were back in his original position, Alara safe behind him. Grak was still staring at his stump, a scream of agony finally building in his throat. He looked up and saw the masked figure standing where he had been, his mother now safe, and he saw the glowing green eyes fixed on him. This was the moment of choice. The moment Izuku Midoriya had never truly been forced to face. He had saved the hostage. The threat was neutralized. The hero's handbook, the one written in his soul, said to stand down, to apprehend the now disarmed villain, but the world he lived in now had a different set of rules. He looked at Alara, trembling but safe behind him. He looked at the smoking stump of Grak's arm. He looked at the pirate's face, now contorted not with pain, but with pure, murderous hatred. Grak would not surrender. He would not learn. If he escaped, he would come back. He would bring more ships, more pirates. He would burn this world to ash out of spite. Corey knew this with an absolute, chilling certainty. Aizawa's words echoed again. Hesitation costs lives. He could not afford to hesitate. He could not allow a future where Thera burned because he chose to be merciful to a monster. The black and white morality of his past life was a luxury he no longer had. Protection, true protection, sometimes required a terrible price. You should have left, Corey said, his voice now devoid of all emotion. It was cold, final. He raised his left hand. Grak's eyes widened in a final, dawning horror. He opened his mouth to beg, to plead, but no sound came out. A palm-sized sphere of brilliant, emerald ki formed in Corey's hand. He didn't shout an attack name. He didn't make a grand gesture. He just thrust his hand forward. The sphere of energy shot across the square and engulfed the pirate leader. There was a silent flash of intense green light, and then, nothing. Grak was gone. Not a trace of him remained. Not even ash. He had been utterly, completely erased from existence. The last pirate, the slender, four-eyed one, had watched the entire exchange with mounting terror. He dropped his blaster, fell to his knees, and began to bow frantically, pressing his forehead to the ground. Mercy! Mercy! We'll leave! We'll never come back. I swear it. Mercy. Corey's violent, green aura receded, sinking back into his body, leaving him trembling in the sudden silence. He looked at the cowering alien, then at the unconscious forms of the others. He looked at the spot where Grak had been. He had done it. He had taken a life. Willfully. Intentionally. The weight of it crashed down on him, a physical blow far greater than anything the pirates could have inflicted. His legs gave out, and he fell to his knees, his body shaking uncontrollably. He reached up and tore the mask from his face, gasping for air as if he were suffocating. This was the cost. This was the reality of the power he held. It wasn't just for saving people. It was for destroying threats. The hero who had sacrificed himself to erase all for one had just performed a similar, albeit smaller, act. But this time, he had to live with it. Alara rushed to his side, her own fear forgotten in the face of his obvious distress. She knelt beside him, placing a frail hand on his trembling shoulder. Corey, she whispered, her voice gentle. He couldn't look at her. He stared at his own hands, the hands that had just snuffed out a life. They looked alien to him. I killed him, he choked out, the words tasting like poison. I had to, he would have, but I killed him. He felt like a monster. The very power that had saved his mother had been used to utterly annihilate another living being. Was this his Saiyan blood taking over? Was he becoming the very thing he despised? Kale came out of the house, his face pale but resolute. He knelt on Corey's other side. He looked at the unconscious pirates, at the crater in the square, and at the spot where Grak was no more. He understood. Listen to me, my son, Kale said, his voice firm but kind. He placed his hand over Corey's. What you did was not born of malice. It was not an act of cruelty. It was an act of protection. You took one life to save countless others. You saved Alara. You saved our village. You saved our world. But the cost. Corey whispered, tears now streaming down his face, mingling with the dirt and sweat. Peace always has a cost, Kale continued, his luminous eyes meeting Corey's. We Therans have forgotten that, living in tranquility for so long. You have reminded us. A guardian does not just tend the garden. Sometimes, he must pull the venomous weeds. The act may be ugly, but it allows the flowers to grow. Do not let the darkness of the act overshadow the light of your intent. You did not kill for pride or for pleasure. You did it for love. His words were a balm on Corey's fractured soul. They didn't erase the guilt, but they contextualized it. They helped him see the gray in a universe he had always tried to paint in black and white. He was a hero in a world that required its heroes to be warriors too. He finally looked up, at his two adoptive parents, their faces filled not with fear of him, but with overwhelming love and gratitude. He wasn't a monster to them. He was their son. Their guardian. A strange, unfamiliar sensation suddenly surged through him. It started deep in his core, a warm, tingling feeling that spread through every fiber of his being. His muscles, strained from the explosive release of his ki, began to mend at an accelerated rate. The exhaustion was replaced by a new, profound sense of strength. His power, the ocean within him, felt deeper, wider. The pathetic power level of 3 he was born with felt like a distant, laughable memory, a Zenkai boost. The Saiyan trait of growing stronger after recovering from the brink of death or extreme exertion. His body, pushed to its absolute limit by the emotional and physical trauma of the fight, was now rewarding him. He could feel his latent potential awakening, his power ceiling shattering and rising to a whole new level. It was a terrifying, exhilarating feeling. He now possessed more power than ever before. The power to protect, and the power to destroy. Kale's words echoed in his mind. It is the intent that matters. He took a deep, shuddering breath and stood up, his resolve hardening. He would bear the weight of what he had done. He would carry this new power not as a weapon, but as a shield. He turned his attention to the remaining pirates. The conscious one was still babbling for mercy. The others were beginning to stir. Corey walked over to their damaged, ugly ship. He spent the next hour using the analytical mind he'd honed over 2 lifetimes to study its systems. He learned about its subpar hyperspace drive, its communications array, and its navigation computer. He found logs detailing their recent activities, their connection to a splinter faction of the Frisia Force. He saw star charts of the local galactic sector. And most importantly, he found their scouters. He picked one up, a green lens device, and placed it over his eye. It beeped to life. He saw numbers flicker over the faces of the waking pirates. 1,200, 950. 1,500. He pointed it at Kale. A 2. He pointed it at himself, and the device shrieked before exploding in a shower of sparks. He now understood how his father had judged him. By this crude, simplistic metric. But he also understood its value as an information-gathering tool. He studied the logs further. He saw chatter about a Saiyan prince named Vegeta, about a tyrant named Frisia, and about a legend. A myth whispered in fear across the galaxy. The legend of the Super Saiyan. The name Frisia burned in his mind, rekindling the cold fire that had been banked for 12 peaceful years. He was still out there. The monster who had orphaned him twice over. A new, unshakable purpose settled over him. It was no longer enough to be the guardian of Thera. This planet would never be truly safe as long as creatures like Frisia and his armies existed. Peace wasn't something you could build a wall around. It had to be won. It had to be defended on a galactic scale. He herded the now terrified pirates into their ship. "Fix your engine," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. "And get off my planet. Tell everyone you meet what happened here. Tell them this world is protected." They scrambled to obey, their fear of him far greater than any loyalty they had to their fallen captain. As they worked, Corey stood on a nearby hill, watching the twin suns begin to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. He held his wooden mask in his hand, tracing its simple, heroic lines. He had made a choice today. He had taken a life to protect his home. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that it would not be the last. He would become stronger, not for conquest, not for pride, but to build a universe where no other child would have to watch their world burn. He would become a shield, not just for a village, but for all the peaceful corners of the galaxy. The soul of Izuku Midoriya had fully accepted the reality of being a Saiyan. He would carry the weight, and he would wield the power. The guardian of Thera looked up at the stars, his eyes filled with a new, unwavering resolve. His watch had just begun. 7 years. In the life of a Saiyan, it was but a heartbeat. In the life of a hero, it was an eternity of vigilance. For Corey, the young man who was once Izuku Midoriya, it was both. The planet Thera had known an unprecedented era of peace. The story of the green spirit of the forest, the masked guardian who had single-handedly and bloodlessly dismantled a crew of marauders, the official story, gently edited by Corey and his parents, omitted the grim finale of its captain, had become a local legend. It was a comforting tale told to children, a whisper of reassurance among the adults. They knew they were protected, and that knowledge allowed their gentle society to flourish without fear. Corey, now a young man of 23, moved through this peace like a fish through water. To the villagers, he was simply Corey, the kind, quiet, and prodigiously strong adopted son of Kale and Alara. He was the one who could single-handedly replant an entire grove of silverwood trees after a landslide, the one who could repair any piece of farming equipment with an almost supernatural understanding of its mechanics, the one whose gentle chiming laughter could coax even the shyest feline out of hiding. He was loved. He was home. But the green spirit was just as real. It was the phantom flicker of motion that diverted a small asteroid shower, breaking the celestial rocks into harmless, glittering dust high in the atmosphere before anyone even sounded an alarm. It was the unseen force that collapsed the tunnels of aggressive, burrowing creatures miles before they could threaten the village's deep-root crops. It was the silent guardian who patrolled the planet's orbit in a stolen, heavily modified pirate ship, ensuring no other predators were drawn to this beacon of tranquility. This duality was his life now, a careful balance between the gentle farmer and the galactic warrior. The weight of Grax erasure had never truly left him. It had settled deep in his soul, a cold, hard stone of reality that had tempered his idealism with pragmatism. It was a constant reminder that the power he wielded, the Saiyan birthright he had once feared, was a tool. Like a surgeon's scalpel, Its purpose was defined entirely by the intent of the hand that held it. His mastery over that tool was now absolute. High on the wind-scoured plateaus where he had first begun his training, Corey stood with his eyes closed, the twin suns warming his face. He was bare-chested, clad only in his simple, dark green trousers. There was no explosive aura, no crackling energy. But to a trained eye, the air around him shimmered, bending the light like a pocket of intense heat. This was ki channeling, sustained at a constant 50%. It was no longer a strain. It was his natural state, as effortless as breathing. His ki flowed through his body in a perfectly controlled, closed circuit, reinforcing every cell, sharpening his senses to an impossible degree. He could feel the tectonic plates shifting deep beneath the planet's crust, hear the fluttering heartbeat of a bird nesting a mile away, and taste the coming rain on the high-altitude winds. His analytical mind had not been idle. He had taken the crude Saiyan ability to sense power levels and refined it into something far more potent. He called it ki signature analysis. He didn't just sense strength, he sensed texture, flavor, intent. The ki of his fellow Therans was a gentle, harmonious hum, like a wind chime orchestra. The ki of the planet's flora was a slow, deep, patient thrum. The ki of the pirates had been a chaotic, jagged static, laced with greed and cruelty. This ability, more than any raw power, was his greatest asset as a guardian. It was his early warning system, his lie detector, his moral compass in a galaxy that had none. He opened his eyes, the dark brown irises holding a depth and wisdom that belied his years. The piece was beautiful. It was everything he had fought and died for in his first life. But it felt fragile, a beautiful glass sculpture on a fault line. And he was the only one who could feel the tremors. Later that day, he retreated to his true sanctuary, the place that represented the other, harsher half of his existence. Hidden deep within a magnetically shielded cavern, far from the village, sat the pirate's ship. It was no longer the ugly, rust bucket he had first encountered. Over the years, Corey had painstakingly reverse-engineered, repaired, and radically upgraded it. Its jagged, aggressive hull was now covered in sleek, radar-absorbent panels he had synthesized himself. Its engines ran silent and efficient. But its most important feature was the communications array. He had transformed it from a simple ship-to-ship transmitter into a sophisticated deep space listening post. He had written complex decryption algorithms, taught himself dozens of alien languages from intercepted transmissions, and created a system that could sift through the cacophony of the galactic ether, flagging keywords and energy signatures of interest. It was his version of the Batcave, a lonely outpost of vigilance. He sat in the captain's chair, the worn metal cool against his skin. The main view screen was not displaying stars, but cascading lines of code and audio waveforms. He was sifting through the chatter on the Frisia Force's old frequencies. Even with their leader long gone from this sector, his former soldiers, now mercenaries and pirates, still used the encrypted channels. For years, it had been the same dreary litany of smuggling routes, petty turf wars, and boasts of plunder. But today was different. A priority alert, flagged by an algorithm he'd written to detect Saiyan terminology, began to blink on his console. The transmission was heavily degraded, bouncing off several relay satellites, but the ship's computers worked tirelessly to clean it up. Repeat, Shui, do you copy? The prince is on the move. I say again, Prince Vegeta is on the move. The voice was reedy and panicked. Corey leaned forward, his heart giving a sudden, powerful thud. Vegeta. The Saiyan Prince. He had read the name in the ship's logs all those years ago. The thought of another Saiyan, royalty, no less, sent a complex shiver of apprehension and curiosity through him. Was he like Bardock? Or was he like the Saiyan children in the creche, obsessed with dominance? He fine-tuned the receiver, amplifying the signal. Where is he headed? A second, gruffer voice, presumably Chui, crackled in reply. He's supposed to be on his way to Frisia Planet 79 for mandatory reassignment. Forget 79! The first voice shrieked. He heard a rumor. Intercepted the same chatter we did? The scouter transmission from the one called Raditz, before he was terminated. Raditz? Another Saiyan name. Corey's mind filed it away. He's gone rogue, Chui. He's heading for some backwater mudball called Earth. He's talking about legendary wish-granting orbs. Calls them Dragon Balls. Says he's going to wish for eternal life. The words hit Corey like a physical blow. Eternal life. The ultimate selfish desire. It was the kind of power All for One would have killed for, a goal that could only lead to unimaginable tyranny. And a Saiyan prince, someone likely raised on conquest and pride, was seeking it. This was bad. This was a threat not just to this Earth, but to the balance of power in the entire galaxy. An immortal, arrogant warrior king was a recipe for endless suffering. He cross-referenced the name Earth in his own star charts, the ones he'd copied from the pod that brought him here. His blood ran cold. It was the destination programmed into his brother's pod. Kakarot. Was his brother there? Was he alive? Had he fulfilled his mission to dominate it? Or had something else happened? The thought of his twin, the only other person in the universe who shared his blood, being tangled up with this arrogant prince filled him with a new, personal sense of dread. For the next several hours, he dedicated the array's full power to tracking any mention of Vegeta, Earth, or Dragon Balls. The picture that emerged was one of escalating chaos. Vegeta and another, larger Saiyan named Nappa had indeed gone off-grid. There were panicked reports from Frisia force outposts they had casually annihilated on their way. But then, a new signal cut through the noise. It was a high-priority, multi-channel broadcast, originating from a command ship far, far away. It was so powerful, so heavily encrypted, that Corey's system struggled to even latch onto it. It was a voice he had never heard, yet a signature of key so vast, and so utterly, malevolently cold that it made the hair on his arms stand up. The key signature was a perfectly controlled, placid lake of absolute evil. It made the pirates he fought feel like harmless children. The ship's speakers crackled, and a smooth, cultured, and utterly chilling voice filled the cockpit. Zarbin Dodoria. Report, Lord Frisia. A gruff, sycophantic voice replied instantly. We have received the same intelligence. It appears Prince Vegeta has learned of the Namekian Dragon Balls. Frisia. The name landed in the silent cockpit like a physical object, sucking all the warmth from the air. Corey's hands clenched on the console, his knuckles turning white. The face of the pale, horned monster in the hover chair, the lazy lift of a single finger, the silent annihilation of his entire world, the memory, always lurking beneath the surface, surged forth with the power of a tidal wave. This was him. The architect of his pain, the butcher of his people. Namekian? Frisia's voice was laced with intrigued silkiness. So the legends are true. And Vegeta seeks them for immortality, I presume? How delightfully ambitious of him. A pity his ambition has outstripped his leash. What are your orders, my lord? A second, more effeminate voice, Zarbin asked. There was a pause, filled with a sense of dreadful, amused contemplation. The monkey's plan is a good one. It's a shame he'll be unable to see it through. Immortality, yes, I believe that would suit me quite well. Change of plans, gentlemen. Set a course for planet Namek. We shall be collecting these Dragon Balls for ourselves. Let Vegeta play hide-and-seek with the locals for a bit. It will be all the more amusing to watch the hope drain from his eyes when he realizes the prize is already mine. A cold, mirthless chuckle echoed through the speaker, a sound that promised nothing but pain and death. Then the transmission cut out. Corey sat in the silence, his body rigid. His key, usually a placid river, was now a raging, barely contained storm. The emerald light of his full power flickered at the edges of his vision. Namek. Dragon Balls. Immortality. Vegeta. And Frisia. It was a convergence of galactic consequence. A perfect storm of greed and power. And at its center was a prize that could turn a tyrant into an eternal, unkillable god. His first instinct was pure, unadulterated Saiyan rage. The desire for revenge, a feeling he had suppressed for over a decade, roared to life. He wanted to fly to this planet Namek and confront the monster who had taken everything from him. He wanted to make Frisia pay. But then, the soul of Izuka Midoriya asserted itself, wrestling the primal rage back into its cage. He took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing the emerald aura back down. Revenge was a hollow pursuit. It wouldn't bring back Bardock or Jine. It wouldn't restore planet Vegeta. Revenge was for the villain. A hero's motivation was different. He closed his eyes and thought not of Frisia's crime, but of his future potential. Frisia, with the power he already possessed, was a plague on the galaxy. He casually wiped out entire civilizations for profit and amusement. Frisia, with the gift of immortality, would be a cancer that could never be cured. He would be an eternal, unending nightmare. The suffering he would inflict over millennia was incalculable. This wasn't about the past. It wasn't about vengeance for the Saiyans. It was about the future. It was about protecting the countless billions of lives on worlds like Thera, peaceful and undefended, who would one day fall under the shadow of an immortal Frisia. His duty was clear. It was the same duty he had faced in his final moments as Deku. A threat had emerged that was too great to be ignored, a villain whose ambition threatened the very foundation of a peaceful existence. He had to intervene. It wasn't a choice. It was an obligation. He stood up, his movements crisp and deliberate. His mind was already formulating a plan. He would need to upgrade the ship's hyperspace drive for a journey of this length. He'd need to pack nutrient synthesizers and medical supplies. He would need to prepare for a multi-front conflict against both the Saiyan Prince and the Galactic Tyrant. But first, there was one thing he had to do. The hardest thing he would ever have to do. He had to say goodbye. The twin suns were setting, casting long, gentle shadows across the valley. The village was quiet, the only sounds the chirping of night-blooming flowers and the soft hum of the Therans preparing for their evening meal. Cory walked through the village, not as the Green Spirit, but as himself. He wore his simple farmer's tunic, his mask left behind in the cavern. He found Alara and Kale sitting on the porch of their home, watching the colors of the sky shift from gold and pink to deep violet. They smiled as he approached, a familiar, welcoming sight that made his heart ache with what he was about to do. "You are troubled, my son," Alara said, her psychic senses always attuned to his emotional state. She patted the spot on the woven bench beside her. He sat down, the simple act feeling incredibly heavy. For a long moment, he just sat with them, soaking in the peace, trying to burn this perfect, tranquil moment into his memory. "I have to leave," he finally said, the words feeling like stones in his throat. Kale, who had been carving a piece of silverwood, stopped, his hands going still. Alara's smile faded, replaced by a look of deep, maternal concern. "Leave?" she asked, her voice a soft whisper. "Where are you going?" "There's a place. A planet called Namek," he began, trying to find the right words to explain a conflict of cosmic scale to people who had never known war. "There are things there, artifacts of great power, and there are very bad people going to claim them. One of them is a man, a monster, who could do terrible damage to the galaxy if he gets what he wants. He wants to live forever." Kale set his carving aside and turned his full attention to Cory. His wise old eyes saw past the simple explanation. He saw the storm raging beneath his son's calm exterior. "This monster," Kale said, his voice quiet but firm. "He has something to do with your past, doesn't he? With the fire you saw as a child?" Cory flinched but nodded. "He's the one who destroyed my first home. His name is Frisia." Alara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She knew the depths of that trauma, had held him through countless childhood nightmares of a world shattering in fire. "Then this is about revenge," she said, her voice trembling. "Cory, no. Don't let the anger of your first life destroy the peace you've found in this one. Stay here. We are safe. You are safe." Cory turned and took her frail, gentle hands in his own. They were surprisingly strong, the hands of a woman who had worked the land her entire life. "This isn't about revenge," he said, looking her directly in the eyes, willing her to see the truth in his soul. "If it were, I would have left years ago. I thought about it, every day, but revenge is a selfish reason. A hero doesn't act for himself." He looked at Kale, then out at the peaceful village, bathed in the twilight glow. "I have to do this for the same reason I put on the mask to fight the pirates. There is a threat that no one else can stop. If Frisia gains immortality, his reign of terror will never end. Worlds like Thera, worlds that can't fight back, will be the first to suffer. Hiding here and protecting one planet isn't enough, not when the entire galaxy is at stake." He squeezed her hands gently. "A hero's duty is to save people. All of them. That includes saving them from Frisia. It's not about avenging the dead, Mom. It's about protecting the living. The conviction in his voice, the pure, undiluted heroism that was the core of his being, shone through. Elara saw it. She saw the man her son had become, not just a Saiyan warrior, but a true guardian. Her fear for his safety was still a raging storm in her heart, but it was overshadowed by an immense, boundless pride. Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded, a sad, beautiful smile gracing her lips. You were always meant for more than this small world, my little star child, she whispered, her thumb stroking the back of his hand. We knew that. We were selfish. We wanted to keep you. This will always be my home, Corey said, his own voice thick with emotion. It's the reason I'm fighting. I'm fighting so there can be more places like Thera in the universe. Kale stood up and placed a hand on Corey's shoulder. A person's nature does not change, whether it's forged in this life or another. You have the soul of a protector, Corey. We would not ask you to be anything less than who you are. Go. Do what you must. And when it is done, his voice broke for a moment, come home to us. The three of them embraced, a silent, tearful farewell on the porch of their small home as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. An hour later, Corey stood before the ship, now fully prepped and humming with power. He was dressed in his simple, durable green tunic and trousers. He held his wooden mask, its familiar weight a comfort in his hand. This was it. He was leaving his paradise to fly into hell, all for a universe that didn't even know he existed. It was the most heroic thing he had ever done. He slipped the mask over his face, the world taking on the familiar view through its carved eye holes. He was no longer just Corey. He was the guardian. With a final look back at the shimmering, peaceful world that had saved him, he boarded the ship. The ramp hissed shut, sealing him in with his resolve. The engines engaged with a low, powerful thrum, and the ship lifted silently from the cavern floor, ascending into the night sky. From his porch, Kale watched the single, dark shape rise towards the heavens, a stark silhouette against the starry expanse. Elara stood beside him, her hand clutching a small, glowing flower. He will be all right, won't he? She whispered to the cosmos. Kale wrapped an arm around her. He is the strongest person I have ever known, he said, his voice filled with a father's unshakable faith. And not just because of his power. He will face this storm, and he will return. High above, Corey engaged the hyperspace drive. The stars outside his cockpit stretched into brilliant, impossibly long lines of light. His course was set. Destination Namek. Mission, save the future. The lone guardian of Thera, the lost son of Bardock, the enduring soul of Izuka Midoriya, shot through the void, a silent green comet on a collision course with destiny. The transition from the silent, streaking void of hyperspace to the relative stillness of real space was always a jolt. One moment, the universe was a tunnel of infinite light. The next, it was a black velvet canvas pricked with the sharp, cold diamonds of distant stars. On the main view screen of Corey's ship, a world of sickly green and murky blue swam into view, illuminated by the harsh, sterile light of three suns. Planet Namek? It looked nothing like the vibrant paradise of Thera or the angry, rocky heart of Vegeta. It looked tired, wounded. And Corey could feel it before he even entered the atmosphere. He closed his eyes, extending his senses, and the placid hum of his own ki became an antenna for the turmoil below. What he felt made his stomach clench. It was a planet screaming in silent, psychic agony. The native ki signature, the life force of the Namekians, was a beautiful, resonant frequency, like the gentle thrum of a cello. But it was fractured, filled with discordant notes of terror and grief. Hundreds of those beautiful notes had been extinguished, leaving behind only hollow, aching silence. Layered over this symphony of suffering were the signatures of the invaders. They were jagged, chaotic, and utterly vile. He could sense the brutish, slobbering glee of a creature he would later know as Dodoria. He could feel the preening, narcissistic cruelty of another, Zarban, a signature as slick and venomous as an oil spill on clear water. And beneath it all, a suffocating, oppressive presence. A ki so vast, so cold, so utterly devoid of anything but malevolent control that it felt less like an energy source and more like a black hole, consuming all light and hope around it. Frisia, he was here. The monster was on this world. Corey's hands tightened on the ship's controls. The rage, the cold fire he had learned to master, began to stir. He took a slow, measured breath, forcing it back down, channeling the anger not into a blind fury, but into a razor-sharp focus. Revenge was not the mission. Protection was. He guided his cloaked ship into the atmosphere, the advanced systems he'd installed making it little more than a whisper in the strange green sky. He flew low over the turquoise oceans and scattered, fungal-looking islands, his senses scanning, searching for the greatest point of distress. He found it moments later, a small village of the iconic mushroom-like Namekian houses, nestled by a calm sea. The village's collective key was a frantic, terrified shriek, and at its center was that slick, venomous signature, Zarbon. Corey landed his ship silently in a deep ravine several miles away and disembarked, the wooden mask of the green spirit already firmly in place. He didn't run. He flowed. With key channeling active at a sustained 60%, he became a blur of motion, a silent green phantom gliding over the alien landscape, his feet barely touching the azure grass. As he crested the final hill overlooking the village, the scene that greeted him made his heroic soul recoil. Several Namekians, tall and proud green-skinned people, lay dead or dying, their simple robes stained with their purple blood. The remaining villagers, mostly elders and children, were huddled together, watched over by a handful of low-level, armored thugs. In the center of the square stood Zarbon. He was an elegant, almost beautiful creature with long, braided green hair and a condescending smirk. He was holding a small, orange, crystalline sphere with 4 red stars inside it, a dragon ball. He was also holding the village elder by the throat, lifting the old Namekian effortlessly off the ground. "I am growing tired of this charade," Zarbon said, his voice smooth and cultured, a horrifying counterpoint to his brutal actions. "You've given me one of your precious trinkets. Now tell me where the others are. My Lord Frisia is a busy man, and he does not appreciate being kept waiting." The elder choked, his ancient face a mask of defiant pain. "We will never help the likes of you." "A pity," Zarbon sighed, as if genuinely disappointed. He casually tossed the dragon ball to one of his subordinates. "Your primitive sense of loyalty is so tiresome." He began to tighten his grip, his knuckles turning white. Corey had seen enough. He didn't announce his presence with a shout or a grand entrance. He simply arrived. One moment, Zarbon was about to crush the elder's windpipe. The next, a hand clad in a simple green fabric clamped down on his wrist. The grip was like steel, utterly immovable. A flicker of silvery green energy pulsed from the hand, sending a numbing shock up Zarbon's arm, forcing him to release the Namekian. Zarbon staggered back, his eyes wide with shock and outrage. "What? Who dares?" He found himself facing a masked figure in a simple green tunic. There was no scouter reading, no ostentatious aura. Just a silent, imposing presence that had appeared from thin air. Corey gently helped the elder to his feet before turning his full attention to Frisia's lieutenant. "Your business with these people is over," he said, his voice calm, yet ringing with an absolute authority that cut through the air. Zarbon stared, a flicker of disbelief turning to fury. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "I am Zarbon, the right hand of the glorious Lord Frisia. These Frisia Force grunts," he gestured dismissively at his own men, "will peel the skin from your bones for your insolence." The grunts, startled into action, raised their blasters. Before a single one could pull a trigger, Corey vanished. He moved in a circular blur around the periphery of the square. There was a series of sharp, distinct thwacks, and then silence. Zarbon looked on in horror as his 4 subordinates crumpled to the ground simultaneously, all unconscious, each with a precise chop mark on the back of their neck. "They won't be doing anything of the sort," Corey stated, now standing exactly where he was before, not even breathing heavily. He pointed a finger at Zarbon. "And neither will you. Leave this planet. Now." Zarbon's face twisted into a mask of pure rage. The creature's vanity was its greatest weakness. To be so effortlessly challenged by this unknown, masked nobody was an unforgivable insult. "You insolent whelp! I will show you the price of disrespecting true beauty and power!" He shrieked, his ki exploding outwards in a violent, purple aura. He shot forward, his fist aimed to cave in Corey's masked face. To Zarbon, he was moving at incredible speed. To Corey, it was a telegraphed, clumsy lunge. Corey sidestepped the blow with fluid grace, letting Zarbon's momentum carry him past. As he did, Corey's foot swept out, hooking Zarbon's ankle. It was a simple, elegant trip, but imbued with Corey's channeled ki, it sent Zarbon tumbling end over end, crashing gracelessly into the wall of a Namekian house. Hidden in the rocky hills overlooking the village, two small figures watched, their eyes wide with disbelief. "Did you see that, Gohan?" Krillin whispered, his voice trembling. "He just tripped him. He tripped one of Frieza's strongest guys like he was a kid in a playground." Gohan, a small boy with a shock of black hair and a brown, furry tail tucked into his pants, nodded frantically. "He's so fast. I couldn't even follow his movements when he took out the other guys. And he's protecting the Namekians." "Who is he?" They had been tracking Zarbon, hoping for a chance to snatch the Dragon Ball, but had been frozen by fear. Now they were witnessing the impossible. Someone was fighting one of Frieza's top men, and winning. Down in the village, Zarbon rose from the rubble, his pristine armor scuffed, his face contorted with humiliation. You tricked me! Enough of these games. I will obliterate you and this entire pathetic village." He flew into the air, gathering energy between his palms for a massive blast. Corey watched him, his head tilted. He relies on explosive, telegraphed attacks. Inefficient. Powerful, but easy to predict. "I don't have time for this," Corey said, more to himself than to his opponent. He crouched slightly, channeling ki into his legs. As Zarbon unleashed a massive, purple wave of energy, Corey shot upwards, not to meet the blast, but to evade it. He moved in a corkscrew pattern, the energy beam searing the air where he had been a nanosecond before. He appeared directly above the stunned Zarbon. "What?" Before Zarbon could react, Corey delivered a swift, powerful axe kick to the back of his head. The blow was precise, carrying just enough force to stun and disorient. Zarbon cried out in pain and plummeted from the sky, carving a deep trench in the ground upon impact. He lay there, groaning, his pride shattered far more than his body. Corey landed softly beside him. "This is your only warning," he said, his voice cold. "The next time we meet, I will not be so lenient." Zarbon glared up at him, pure hatred in his eyes. He knew he was outclassed, at least in speed and technique. In a rare moment of self-preservation trumping vanity, he made his choice. With a snarl, he pushed a button on his wrist gauntlet, and a wave of disruptive energy filled the air, a makeshift smoke screen. When it cleared, he was gone, streaking away into the green sky. Corey watched him go, then turned his attention to the Dragon Ball, which had rolled away from one of the unconscious grunts. As he bent to pick it up, he sensed two new key signatures approaching, timid but determined. He straightened up, holding the 4-star ball, and turned to face the rocky hills. Krillin and Gohan emerged, looking small and utterly out of place in the alien landscape. Krillin held his hands up in a non-threatening gesture. Gohan hid slightly behind him, peering out with wide, curious eyes. Hi, Krillin began, his voice squeaking slightly. We don't want any trouble." That was amazing what you did back there." Corey remained silent, his analytical gaze sweeping over them. The small, bald one had a familiar energy signature, disciplined and trained. Earthling. The boy had a strange, hybrid key, a mix of that same Earthling signature and something else. Something wild, powerful, and achingly familiar. Then his eyes fell on the brown, furry tail peeking out from Gohan's pants. Corey's breath caught in his chest. A tail. Just like his. A Saiyan tail. On a child who was clearly not a full-blooded Saiyan. The pieces clicked into place in his mind with dizzying speed, the pods sent to Earth. The name Raditz mentioned in the transmission. "This child, your father," Corey said, his voice losing some of its commanding edge, replaced by an urgent curiosity. "Is his name Kakarot?" Krillin and Gohan exchanged a shocked look. "His dad's name is Goku," Krillin corrected, bewildered. "How do you know about him?" "Who are you, Goku?" Corey murmured the name. An Earth name. Of course. He had been raised there. I am a friend. Or I hope to be. My name is Cory. He looked at Gohan, 1,000 questions swirling in his mind. This was his nephew. His brother's son. Kakarot was alive. He had a family. The wave of relief and emotion that washed over him was so powerful he almost staggered. I am Kakarot's brother, he stated simply. Krillin's jaw dropped. Brother? But Goku doesn't have a brother. Well, he did, Raditz, but you're nothing like him. You saved those people. Our race is not defined by its worst examples, Cory said, his gaze softening as he looked at Gohan. He could see the resemblance now, in the shape of the eyes, the untamable black hair. We can choose to be better. Before their uneasy conversation could continue, a new key signature slammed into the area like a thunderclap. It was arrogant, furious, and radiating immense power. It was a signature Cory had never felt before, yet he recognized its flavor instantly. It was the key of a Saiyan, a figure descended from the sky, landing with a crunch of displaced earth. He was short, compact, with a proud, regal bearing and a distinctive widow's peak. He wore the standard Saiyan battle armor, scuffed and damaged. It was Prince Vegeta. His black eyes, burning with fury and disbelief, swept over the scene. He saw the unconscious Frieza Force grunts, the rescued Namekians, and the Dragon Ball in Cory's hand. Then his gaze fell upon Cory's masked face, then to Krillin, and finally to Gohan's tail. What is the meaning of this? Vegeta snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Another Saiyan survivor? Crawling out from under some rock? And consorting with Frieza's weakling runts and these pathetic underlings? He spat on the ground. You disgrace our warrior name. Cory straightened up, shielding Gohan and Krillin with his body. He faced the prince, recognizing the same blind arrogance he had seen in the Saiyan children of the creche, magnified 1,000 times over. There is no disgrace in protecting the innocent, Cory said, his voice once again cold and firm. Vegeta let out a short, barking laugh. Protecting the innocent? You sound like Kakarot, the low-class clown who betrayed his own heritage. Our heritage is conquest. Our birthright is to rule. Might is the only law in this universe, and you are standing here, playing nursemaid to a bunch of green slugs. You are a traitor to your blood. The words, so similar to the taunts of his childhood, to Bardock's disappointed pronouncements, struck a nerve. But Cory did not let his anger show. Our heritage is destruction, Cory countered, his voice ringing with the conviction of a lifetime of ideals. It is a legacy of blood and death, handed down by tyrants like Frieza. I choose to build something better. I choose to protect. Then you have chosen to die. Vegeta roared, his rage finally boiling over. He exploded in a golden aura of power, the ground shaking around him. You are a defective, bleeding heart failure, and I will erase your disgusting sentimentality from existence. I am the prince of all Saiyans, and you will kneel. He shot forward, his fist cocked back, aiming to obliterate Cory. Krillin screamed, "Look out!" Cory didn't flinch. He met Vegeta's charge head-on. The two Saiyans clashed, and the resulting shockwave flattened what was left of the village houses and threw Krillin and Gohan tumbling through the air. The fight that followed was a battle of opposing philosophies made manifest. Vegeta was a storm of raw, untamed power. Every punch was meant to shatter mountains, every kick to crack the planet's crust. He threw ki blasts with wild abandon, his movements fueled by pure, unadulterated rage and pride. He was chaos and fury. Cory, in stark contrast, was a river of controlled force. He was a study in absolute efficiency. He didn't meet Vegeta's blows with equal power. He deflected them, redirecting the prince's own momentum against him. He flowed around the hurricane of Vegeta's assault, his ki channeling allowing him to move with a speed and precision that bordered on precognition. He saw the subtle tells in Vegeta's posture, the twitch of a muscle that betrayed his next move, and countered it before it was even launched. Stand still and fight me like a Saiyan! Vegeta bellowed in frustration, after a powerful right hook phased through Cory, who had used a burst of speed to create an afterimage. I am, Cory replied, his voice calm as he reappeared behind Vegeta and delivered a sharp, focused kick to the back of his knee, forcing the prince to stumble. I'm just fighting smarter. Cory wasn't trying to win a brawl. He was deconstructing his opponent. His attacks weren't haymakers, they were surgical strikes. A nerve pinch to the shoulder to numb Vegeta's arm, a low kick to disrupt his balance. A small, hyper-compressed ki blast, no bigger than a marble, that forced Vegeta to expend a massive amount of energy to block it. To Krillin and Gohan, watching from a safe distance, it was baffling. Vegeta was clearly the stronger of the two, his power level a raging inferno they could feel from miles away. But the masked man was untouchable. He was making the Prince of all Saiyans look like a clumsy amateur. He's not even trying to hurt him badly, Gohan observed, his young mind grasping the core of the conflict. He's just teaching him a lesson. Vegeta's frustration mounted into a full-blown narcissistic injury. This wasn't a fight, it was a humiliation. This low-class-looking trash, this traitorous weakling, was dancing around him, making a mockery of his power. "I have had enough of you!" Vegeta screamed, flying back and extending his hands in his signature stance. "If you will not face my power head-on, then I will obliterate you and this entire miserable planet." Gallic gun. Fire! A massive, terrifying beam of purple energy erupted from his hands, a wave of pure destruction that tore a trench in the ground as it shot towards Corey. Corey stood his ground. He didn't prepare a counterbeam. Instead, he brought his hands up, palms forward, and as the Gallic gun was about to hit him, he caught it. The force of the blast was immense, digging his feet into the ground and sending cracked spiderwebbing out for hundreds of meters. But he held it. His silvery green aura flared as he channeled nearly 80% of his power, not to overpower the beam, but to contain and redirect its energy flow, letting it dissipate harmlessly into the ground beneath him. When the light faded, Corey stood in the bottom of a massive crater, completely unharmed. Vegeta stared, his mouth agape, his mind utterly unable to comprehend what he had just witnessed. "How?" Vegeta whispered, his pride finally cracking. "Power without control is just noise," Corey said, his voice echoing from the crater. "You have a great deal of power, Prince. But you are enslaved by it. You don't wield it, it wields you." Before Vegeta could respond, a new sound filled the air. A high-pitched, screaming whine that grew louder and louder. 5 streaks of light tore through the green sky, arcing over the horizon. They landed in a perfect line a few hundred meters away, their entry pods kicking up huge plumes of dust. 5 hatches hissed open in perfect synchronization. Krillin felt a wave of despair so profound it almost made him pass out. No, it can't be." Corey's head snapped towards the new arrivals. His key signature analysis was screaming at him. 5 new power sources, all of them monstrous. One was weak and bizarre, another a brutish mountain of muscle, a third was flamboyant and fast, a fourth, and a fifth. The 5th signature was immense, dwarfing even Vegeta's. It was calm, disciplined, and utterly confident. It was the key of an elite, professional killer. As the dust settled, 5 figures stood revealed in absurd, theatrical poses. A short, green, 4-eyed alien. A hulking red-skinned brute with white hair. A handsome man with long, purple hair. A blue, horned humanoid. And at their center their leader, a tall, muscular man with 2 black horns on his head. Vegeta's face went pale, a sheen of cold sweat breaking out on his brow. "The Ginyu Force," he whispered, the name tasting like ash. The leader, Captain Ginyu, struck a final, dramatic pose. "The Ginyu Force has arrived," he announced, his voice booming across the ravaged landscape. "By order of the great Lord Frieza, this planet's Dragon Balls, and all who stand in our way, are hereby forfeit." The playful, almost comical nature of their entrance was utterly belied by the crushing weight of their power levels. The conflict between Corey and Vegeta, a battle for the very soul of the Saiyan race, was instantly rendered meaningless. It was a squabble between 2 children in the shadow of 5 approaching tidal waves. Corey rose from his crater, his gaze fixed on the newcomers. He analyzed their signatures, catalogued their strength, and understood the situation in a fraction of a second. Alone, neither he nor Vegeta stood a chance. The Earthlings would be slaughtered. Frieza would get his wish. The choice was clear. It was not a choice he liked. It was a choice born of pure, desperate necessity. He glanced at Vegeta, who was still frozen, his prideful rage replaced by the cold, hard calculus of survival. Their eyes met across the battlefield. An unspoken understanding passed between them. "We deal with them," Vegeta growled, his voice low and tight, forcing the words out as if they were poison. "Then I will personally rip you to shreds, you disgrace." Corey nodded, his masked face unreadable. "Agreed. For now, we have a common enemy." The two Saiyans, the Prince of Pride and the Hero of Purpose, stood on the same ravaged ground, the chasm of their ideologies between them. But for the first time, they were facing the same direction, towards a threat that promised to annihilate them both.